As a kid, my favorite superheroes were the stereotypical good guys. Characters like Captain America, Superman, and Spider-Man were my favorite. Growing up with their comics, I was just enthralled by the idea of the guy who made things right and did it the right way. They stood up against injustice for those that could not and helped those in need. Their respective villains made them struggle with their moral code, but they ultimately made the right choice, setting an example for the rest of us. In the comic book world, the threats are a lot more obvious than in our own. Through the use of villains who personify the complex evils that plague us, morality is made clear. There's a good guy and there's a bad guy. Things are simple. And that's also been its main source of criticism. There's this idea that's dominated storytelling and culture for the past 20 years, that simple morality is naive. If your story has villains and heroes, it's too immature and childish. And that real art and real maturity means embracing moral ambiguity. And this is the classic Game of Thrones versus Lord of the Rings debate. Tolkien's story made it evident that evil and good existed and who was on each side. Lord of the Rings is heavily influenced by Christian morality. Sauron is the embodiment of evil, as evident in his name, the Dark Lord. Aragorn is the Hidden King. Like Christ, he heals before he rules, and his kingship is recognized, not seized. George R.R. Martin wrote Game of Thrones specifically to subvert this. His main criticism of Tolkien's story was this naive view of morality and the simplicity of good versus evil, which he did not believe existed. He created characters specifically to mock their Lord of the Rings counterparts. This is evident with Jon Snow, clearly taking a lot of traits from Aragorn. He's reluctant, brooding, and complex, which really means he spends most of the story unsure of what's right, while Aragorn knows what's right, but struggles with whether he's worthy to do it. One story asks the question of what is good, but never answers it, while the other one states, this is good, now live up to it. But I think Martin and all the cynical critics of comic book heroes, of Lord of the Rings, Star Wars, any story really that clearly pits good versus evil, got wrong. Tolkien didn't really believe the world was simple. He fought in World War I. He knew exactly how brutal and morally complicated reality could be. He chose to write a story where good and evil were clear because he understood that the only response to a messy and complicated world is a moral compass, and a clear one. When everything is gray, nothing really matters. If every choice is equal, why make any choice at all? If Aragorn is no better than Lurtz, then why would he fight him to save Frodo? If Frodo and Sam's quest to destroy the ring is just one side of the story, why would they go through all that suffering and pain? Game of Thrones gives you moral relativism. Everyone has their reasons, everyone is flawed, and there is no one that's purely good or evil. And this leads to being a cynic. The lesson of Game of Thrones is not to trust anyone. Everyone is corrupt, and idealism will get you killed, as evident in the execution of Ned Stark, one of the few characters in the show that actually seems to be good. The lesson behind The Lord of the Rings is that the world is dark, but you can still choose to be good. Now, unfortunately, as I grew older, this criticism of simplicity started to get to me, and I started to inherently value complexity in stories over simplicity. As a teenager, ambiguity made more sense in response to a strange and complex world. I started to think that my childhood heroes had it better than me. Their world was clearly simple. It was obvious who they had to fight and who they had to save, what was good and what was bad. But I did not have that same luxury in such a strange and difficult world. It started to become impossible to relate to them or even to aspire to be like them because of the evident difference in our realities. Looking back, I was simply the product of a cultural shift that rejected established values and the notion of truth. But that didn't really improve my life. Quite on the contrary. It was only when I stumbled into Stoicism and back into some old established notions of personal responsibility and the value and responsibility of doing good as an obligation that my life began to improve a bit more. The very ideas that all of my childhood heroes have been preaching all along. And I think really this is why we need heroes like Aragorn or Superman, When things get blurry, we need a clear moral compass. And when everyone is saying that it depends, you need someone or something that says, this is what's right. The world tells us that morality is relative and that the truth is subjective, and that with this information you can form your own meaning, no longer attached to old concepts or values. This sounds liberating until we realize that most people can't really do this, including me. We need a framework that tells us what good is and what it looks like. We need something to aim for, and the only reason we don't think we do is because we were born in a society that inherently tells us what is good and what is wrong. A society that took a lot of Christian values and adopted them as common sense, to the point that we forgot where it came from. Someone had to do the heavy lifting of actually defining good and evil and putting that out to us, most of us. But I'm not really here to argue this from a philosophical standpoint, because ultimately what solved it for me was utility. Believing that there was good and evil, and that things were objectively wrong or right, was simply a lot more useful for my life, and it made my life better. Once I was clear on what was the things that I needed to be doing and not doing, it became a lot easier to do them, and by doing it, my life improved a lot. It's simply much better, in my opinion, to live a life believing that there is good and evil. Purpose is made a lot clearer because we all naturally want to be good. Every kid wants to be Superman before the world shames him out of this naive desire to do good for others and replace it with the look out for yourself way of thinking. Ultimately, the characters we were led to believe that were dull and simple were the ones that already figured out something very profound about the world. That if you allow yourself to live without a clear moral compass, you end up falling prey to whatever ideology someone else throws at you. If you don't know what you will live in, someone else will choose it for you. The world doesn't really need more cynics sitting around arguing what is good and bad. It needs people that believe in good and act on it. And this is why we valued those superheroes so much as kids. Superman isn't interesting because he has powers. He's interesting because he has these godlike powers and still chooses to use them for good. Aragorn isn't compelling because he's this skilled swordsman or the Heathen King. He's compelling because, despite his doubts of whether he's worthy of his title, he still does what is right and what is necessary. Heroes show us that even when the world is dark and when things are complicated, you can and you should decide to be good.
What are we holding on to, Sam? There's some good in this world, Mr. Frodo. And it's worth fighting for.